welcome to the Homestead Skill of the Month Club. I'm Esther Emery. This is my friend and neighbor, Johanna. And this is the fourth one of the talks that she and I have done together for our January theme of planning and preparedness. We're going to have a conversation that some of you have really been waiting for. We both are people who live off the grid. I have lived off the grid for almost 4 years, and Johanna for that number of months. So we're going to have a conversation about what you might expect if you are moving off-grid, kind of sharing our different experiences about that. This is to fit in with a theme of preparedness and thinking about off-grid or grid-down situations, but we're going to go ahead and just dish about our personal experiences. Here we go. Okay, so what can people expect? I'm going to start with you. What can people expect moving off the grid?
The biggest thing that kind of hit me and my children was the quiet. It was just quiet. Unless we could hear you, which we can't really hear you that much. So there was just lots of different things that we had to get used to, but the quiet and then the withdrawal. The withdrawal from TV screens, because you don't think you're addicted. Nobody does.
Right.
But TV screens, laptop screens, tablet screens, all these things for the first little while, and we didn't even have internet for the first 3 months. So that was a Christmas present. Yay! Thank you, Adam. But yeah, just
quiet and
being okay with a different situation and learning the new situation.
Sure. Yeah, so let me speak a little more to that idea of quiet. I actually had sought out quiet and had gone through an experience in my life where I had cut off internet long before I lived off the grid and experienced that. You don't necessarily know what you're feeding your mind. You don't realize what kind of a diet your mind is on until you change it. So I do think that that's a dramatic difference. It's something that you could practice right in your home, wherever you live. You can't entirely shut out the noise of, for example, if you're in a city, but you could change your relationship with screens and kind of practice that idea of a less entertainment, less distraction.
Electronics fast.
Sure, and whether that's something that you want to do or not, I do think that Johanna's right. I'm sharing Johanna's experience that a major shift in how you live moment to moment is quiet. Big deal.
It is. So another thing that we hit was there is more work involved.
More work.
It's not necessarily a huge ton of work, but it's just different type of work that you're not used to. It's not muscle memory to have to heat the water before I use the water in a situation. I just would turn on the tap and there's my hot water. And we have to heat it now. And it will be there probably for the next year and a half-ish.
Yeah, it took us 3.5. But yeah, sure, whatever. It's okay. I'm not jealous or anything.
So there's also new ideas that come along with whatever you're doing. So don't be afraid to think out of the box when you're coming on a situation that is different than what you've previously done.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to go back to the work thing.
Okay.
You're onto a new idea. And yeah, I think that the amount of responsibility for your life moment to moment can be a huge shock. A huge shock. Even now that Nick and I have running water and a heating situation that doesn't require constant attention, really, to keep it going, we still are responsible for our animals, for our snow removal, for our trash, there's so many elements of our life that we are responsible for moment to moment. It really does accumulate into, work is one word for it, but it isn't necessarily hard labor, but it is just a lot of things you got to do. And there isn't somebody else doing it for you. And I think that's huge. And I want to make sure that we hear that and say it before we move on to anything else.
Yeah, there's things that you don't necessarily think about. Like you hit on trash, or is my vehicle going to go in and out of the road?
Right.
Or food, water, heat, shelter.
Sure.
All these different things are just different, and they need to be done differently. And thinking about those things is one part of the thing you have to plan for. So this year we're hauling water. And so we had a vehicle that would haul the water and take it up the hill and everything. It was a great situation. It broke. And so we had to get a smaller vehicle, so a smaller thing for water, more trips, and we still had to figure out how to get it up there. So we had to think so many ways out of the box to make this thing happen that it was already working. It was working for us great. So sometimes you have to be adaptable and be ready to change your plans.
Right. So the water is not optional, right? You can't sit by the fire and daydream about your water. That's something that you actually have to have.
Yes, you do.
So thinking about solutions for that. So what did you end up with?
We ended up with a smaller tank, and it fits in the vehicle that we have. And then we haul it up the hill in a sled.
Right.
And then
cool.
That's just how we do it right now. And eventually it might be a wagon or we'll upgrade the vehicle. But we'll have to see.
Great. Yeah, that's good. That's a good example.
Okay. So this one says, in the winter there's more dark. We get dark about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And so you have to, we can't stop the earth from spinning on its axis. And the same thing happens in the summer. And there's just longer days in the summer, and getting children to bed down, or just your day starts earlier because people wake up earlier. It just kind of happens that way, but we can't change that. So you just kind of have to just go with it.
Now, I can say in year 4 that I love it. That's actually one of my favorite things about living off-grid. My first winter here was kind of depressing because the darkness would fall in the late afternoon, and I would feel like this almost dread that it was going to be at least 12 or 14 hours before the light came back again. My kids still awake and dinner maybe not made yet. So thinking about all that darkness, it put a lot of weight on me. But now that I've been doing it for 3 years or so, I think it's my favorite thing about living off the grid, actually, that we're connected to the seasons. And there's a kind of way of regulating those different ways of being, those kind of personalities of the seasons. In the summertime, we just spend all day outside, and it's great, but we could never sustain that kind of physical activity. We couldn't build as hard as we do in the summertime all year around. And then in the wintertime, theoretically, when there isn't a whole bunch of snow falling, we get to rest. This is not a very restful winter so far, but a restful winter is a wonderful thing when it's quiet and dark and you can spend quality time with your family. So I actually do love those rhythms. If we weren't getting quite as much snow right now, be able to get back to that. But what else were we going to talk about?
So I have another story about dark.
Oh, okay.
So we lived in another situation where we lived up in Alaska. We lived in Fairbanks. And when that dark would come, it would not come back for 3 months. And that there are times in your life where you have to do things drastically different than what you would have to do to make yourself healthy and happy on the inside. I mean, usually I would not bundle up my kids at 0 degrees and go take them to an indoor playland. But I had to do those types of things. And sometimes you need to adapt your situation to those wonderful things that are out there and find them and do them. And then vice versa. In the summer, that light didn't go away for 3 months. We had tons of light. We had this one fun time where we were on 4-wheelers and we were just having a blast. And all of a sudden the kids started getting cranky. I mean, super cranky. And we're like, what in the heck is wrong with you? You have red vines. Why are you sad? Like, you have red vines, right? And we looked at the time and it was 2 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
It looked like noon. I mean, so just have fun with the situation that you're in.
Yeah. And that's a really good transition because we also wanted to talk about
Kids.
how going off grid is different with kids, which of course isn't everybody's situation, but kids are kind of any relationship, possibly a little more so. Right? They're just like humans, except more so.
They're very needy humans.
Right? So let's try and share a little bit about going off-grid with kids. What has been your experience?
So my kids listen to everything we say. So we talked about hauling water.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's on the video, but
we'll find it.
So we haul our water up to our house. And when we get kind of panicked about anything, our kids listen. And our older kids had pared back their water to like a half a cup a day, and we didn't know until they started having headaches. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, oh, I don't feel good. I have a headache. And I'm like, what's going on? Did you drink? And they're like a half a cup of water, that's all. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what we wanted. Here, drink more water. Please consume more. No, there's other ways to save water. Please, this is drinking water. Please drink it all. I want you to drink. So you have to let your kids understand your expectations.
Very wise. I have not ever had that problem. My kids are a little younger. I don't think I've ever had my kids try to jump ahead and solve a problem from having heard their parents talk. When that happens to me, we're all going to celebrate. I'm going to throw a party. But I think I can certainly see that happening with my kids. They are wonderful, sensitive people. They're just a little younger. But I also consider the opposite problem, which is that you have a solution. For example, we're going to wash our hands in this way that only uses a little bit of water. And your kids just aren't able to do that because they don't have the maturity or the skill level yet to be able to accomplish that. And it can be really disappointing, really frustrating. I think that can happen with any relationship too, with your partner or spouse that you're going off-grid with, where you can say, I have this problem solved, I have this situation solved with something that would work for me. And then the other person or child walks into that same situation and it just doesn't work. So being prepared for that kind of flexibility or, even the disappointment that might come with that has definitely been part of the package for us.
Yes. So one of the ways that kids changes the dynamic is how primitive you can be.
Yeah, for sure.
So with kids or without kids, you can choose your level of primitive. Mm-hmm. You can live in an earthen dugout, or you can live in this beautiful home that's finished and have it be off-grid because you're working with solar or you're working with generators or you're just not on the grid. And those type of things and situations are great anywhere you are on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you can fall anywhere on that spectrum depending on how much money you have or have spent, right? I mean, I think that there's an infinite number of kind of manifestations of an off-grid life, depending on who you are and what resources you've put into it. And that's really freeing. It's kind of exciting to say, oh, there isn't just one way to do this. I can do this whichever way is appropriate. But then also it can be hard to realize that you may have imagined something over at this end of the spectrum and you're getting something over at this end. But also I think what Johanna was bringing up that's really important is that as an individual, you might have an off-grid solution that would work for you. And then with a family, that may not be the same. For me personally, I've definitely made choices in the last couple of years based on having children. I didn't have internet in my home at all for the first 2 years that I was off-grid. And that worked well for me. I have some tendencies toward internet addiction, and also I'm a public person. So when I get on the internet, I tend to interact with a lot of people, which is wonderful and great and kind of exhausting. And so I did like that setup of not having internet in my house. It wasn't going to work for a whole family. So I made that change, and it's redirected a lot of things about our life, not just that one thing. And that was definitely just a matter of being a person with a family, with other human beings, with other needs.
Very true. Mm-hmm. So another thing that you kind of have to think about is who is going to work, who's going to bring that money into the situation so you can have whatever kind of off-grid lifestyle you would like. So how far is the commute, or can you work online?
Yeah. Thinking about finances for moving off-grid, you almost want to think about two different segments. The money that you have up front to be able to get your setup up front, and then the money you're going to need for upkeep, you can think of those as two separate things. At least for Nick and I, we were coming from an urban situation where we had a kind of urban income. You know, Nick had a pretty nice job when we were in Boston. So there was that question of how can we reserve as much of this as possible to carry with us to a situation where we're not going to have access to that job. And if Nick is going to be able to do that kind of work, it's going to be through traveling away, which will then be a great hardship for his family. I mean, the hardest moments for me were the first year of living off-grid when Nick was gone. Not just because a bear came, but also because they were just literally hard moments.
Well, everyone has their place in an off-grid life. My husband does certain things that I don't do as well as him.
Yep.
I mean, I can haul a 5-gallon propane tank. 7-gallon is the big one. You know, I can haul it up the hill, but I don't do it nearly as efficiently as he can.
Yeah, we were just talking about this off camera, actually, that it's an interesting thing to negotiate when there's so much more work, which we talked about earlier, when you're responsible for so many things. It can both stretch and I think ultimately bring maturity to a marriage. You know, but it is a challenge because when things get harder, even when you're being respectful and responsive and paying attention, even when you're doing all those things right, it's still harder.
It is. So going off grid, moving, any of these type of things, it's not a magic button. It doesn't fix things that are a little difficult to begin with. It doesn't fix it. So just be prepared for the same problems you had somewhere else to be there too.
That's a really important point because for many of us, we're going off grid because we want to have the best possible life. We want to have solutions to problems that may be really pervasive or rampant in society. Maybe we don't want to live the kind of life that it looks like is laid out for us. We want to make our own life. And it can be heartbreaking to find that your problems follow you, or that some of the issues that you had in town, you then just have in the woods as well. Not that going off grid is necessarily in the woods, but I do think that going off grid it really does have that kind of spiritual chance for renewal. It is a chance to start over, especially because we talked about that first thing, quiet. You're going to have this shell shock into quiet, you know?
You have more time.
In time?
Because you're not consumed by other things that you feel like are always there that have to be taken care of. They're not necessarily there and have to be taken care of.
Right. So there is a chance to start over, but I think what Johanna was saying, or at least what I hope she's saying, is that there's personal work that comes with that. You know, or you have to keep working at that. You can't just suddenly say, I'm off grid, I pulled the plug, and now I'm free. You know, because some of our chains really are on the inside and come with us. But that's not to say that this isn't worth doing. At least for us, it has been. I don't know. Where are you at? Is it worth it for you?
It's worth it for me. It's worth it. I actually had an escape plan.
Right?
In my plan.
So good to confess that, right?
I had an escape plan. We spend so much a month on keeping the house going and adding new things, and whatever we would use that way, I could go home. You know, if I couldn't hack it, there was an escape plan for me. And I needed that before I jumped.
I kind of wish I'd been that smart. I love your personality that you thought of that. Right?
I totally did.
Johanna found me yesterday in front of my cellar. She came down to ask when we were going to do these videos. And it was dinner time. I had already started the dinner. And I was trying to get my cellar door open with a big chunk of ice in front of it so that I could get the sauce, which was literally already on the stove.
Already prepared.
It was all
and
right.
it's in a bottle in the cellar that she can't get into.
So Johanna came in and she took the shovel right out of my hands. She said, I'm going to do that. She did indeed shovel me right out. But we thought we'd share that moment too because you see us in our we are having a lot of fun. We are having a lot of fun. But to think that I, in particular, have things sort of together or organized or never make mistakes would be
We're very real people.
Right, not the right thing at all.
With very real lives.
Right, exactly. So that has been a chat about what to expect when you go off grid. This was for the Skill of the Month Club, but there's no homework to go with it or anything. It's just things for people to think about who are interested in planning and preparedness and the idea of going off grid or surviving an off grid situation. I hope we've given you some things to think about today. And we'll